A very good morning to you. It is payday for many, 30th of May, and we sit here close to the end of the month when there's more months at the end of the paycheck than there's paycheck at the end of the month. But we are privileged to be with you. If you've joined us, you have joined the Fifth Connection, and our discussion continues as we track through the storyline of mindfulness. What is it? Why is it important? And what is the impact of having the mind of Christ permeate our minds? His disposition, his attitude permeating every area of our life, because mindfulness is about embodiment. It's about living the Christian life, not having all the correct propositions down, but by living in a way, the way that is Christ. We are followers of the way. 9 times in the book of Acts, that descriptor is mentioned. And followers of the way are given to wise living. And wisdom doesn't bend to rules. That's why across our lifetime, as we continue to transform, we become the sages. Not the bard in the yard with no sage on the stage, but the sages are those who have learned how wisdom is cultivated from that platform of LOVE, love. The final apologetic, as Francis Schaeffer described it. It's not just the final apologetic, it's the ultimate apologetic. Because if that apologetic doesn't show, nothing else will show. Nothing else of worth or value will show. So we continue right along in our talking through what mindfulness looks like in the life, what it looked like in the life of Christ, what it looks like in the life of the believing community. That's those who embrace Christ. And in chapter 1 of Philippians, we see that mindfulness inspires connections. In chapter 2 of the story, it ignites cognition, gets us to think well. It drives us to think hard, because thinking takes sweat. Thinking takes energy. And our thinking must be cross-shaped, shaped by the cruciform Christ. Death and resurrection is what characterizes our identity transformation. And so we saw that in the first 11 verses of chapter 2, Paul describes the meta mind, the mind which is the mind of Christ. And in these 11 verses, we see the humbled, self-exalted. That's the picture which is at the heart of all stories. The mother of all stories in the scriptures is verse 5 to verse 11. Who being in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, took upon himself the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself, became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore, God has highly exalted him. He's highly elevated, so that every knee bows, and a knee that can't bend, knees will be supplied. Every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess that he is Lord. His base reality He's the source of being to the glory of God the Father. And then from verse 12 onwards, uh, Paul is a great storyteller because he picks out two examples of two men in whom the mind of Christ was embodied. First one is Timothy. And Brother Tim is our pavement special. Comes from a mixed background. He gives a pavement perspective and bridge people who are neither black nor white, nor pink nor green, but have all the colors of the rainbow, the cultural rainbow, imbibed into their being because of their birth, can become bridges for transformation, bridges for reconciliation. And we've not been too great at that even in our own culture, because I don't think our people group has risen to the challenge and are living out their Christ identity in the midst of cultural givens. And so Timothy is the first example. And so we're going to complete the couple of lines in the story where we are told that Timothy has proven worth. He's got the credential, but it's not a degree credential. His credentials have to do with his high relationality as a servant in the endeavor of the good news. High relational. He can relate to people. Can you relate well to people? Let's add another descriptor. All kinds of people. Have you learned the art of doing that? I think whenever you are in a people's calling, you don't have the luxury of whom you need to relate to and relate with and around. Because it takes all kinds to make a world. Timothy has shown his proven worth because as a father with a son with a father, he has served with me in the gospel. He came out of a very nurturing kind of relationship because the apostle to the Gentiles had taken him under his wing. And so he stands as an example of the man that Paul said, I want to send him to you in verse 3, as soon as I see how it will go with me. And Paul says, I hope to do that because I live between expectation and realization. I live with high hope. Because that's what hope is. Living in the present with the future in mind. I'm able to combine those two things and have the future draw me forward. Verse 24. Paul says, I am persuaded in the Lord. In other words, I trust in the Lord. The word peitho in the original text is often used for trust. To be persuaded. I'm persuaded in the Lord that shortly I myself will come also. Because Paul had this high confidence and reliability as trust in the Lord. And he says, I know what personal presence does. That's why I myself will come shortly. Not because I'm a control freak. Many of us are control freaks. Right? We micromanage our relationships. We micromanage people. We micromanage our families because we have no confidence in people, because we have no confidence or very low confidence in God. Because God can do a better job. And that's why I can have confidence in God, in how He's moving in the flow of reality. Because base reality has to do with the flow of reality. Our reality is flowing. I cannot change the flow of reality. I need to get into that flow so that whatever comes at me and whatever I go at within that flow is met with great courage and fortitude and high trust and confidence in God. So Paul prizes personal presence. It's like when somebody says, I'm here, I am here, I am present. Do you see me? Can you see me? You know, some of us become invisible in a conversation. People talk and talk, and all of a sudden we just disappear into thin air because they talk right past us. We aren't present to them. But personal presence is a big thing. I am present. I see you. Do you see me? Do you acknowledge my being here? Being. Because I am a human being, right? And I'm in touch with the source of being, who is God, because He is what base reality is all about. Acts 17:25-28. In Him we live and move and have our being. All of God's creation exists inside of Him. Try that one for size. That is why we need the scriptures, because the scriptures is the instrument that orients me to life and living. The scriptures is what orients me as a follower of the way. But how in the world does mindfulness fit into orientation? When I become mindful, I become strategically intentional about life and living. The way Christ was strategic and intentional about what He did. He left heaven's glory. Transcendence collided with immanence. He became a man. He lived as a man. He died as a man. And He rose as a glorified man. How does that tie into orientation? Well, orientation is the affordance of movement in a non-drifting kind of way. Can I repeat that? Affordance, orientation is the affordance of movement in a non-drifting way. Don't just drift along and reach your goal. It's not about drifting. It's about intentional movement in a non-drifting way that balances two things. It balances the horizontal and the vertical. Paul had an orientation to life. Soos ze sê in Afrikaans, wat skrik van niks. He was goal-oriented, and at the same time, he was high relational. His horizontal and vertical axes were in balance with each other. They were proportional. They were proportionately balanced. The horizontal, relational to God. The vertical, relational to man and people around you. To keep those two things in proportionality, in what we call ratio. Ratio has to do with ratio and proportionality. The scriptures orients us to the flow of reality. How does that happen? The scriptures, as I interact, as I climb into, as I make contact with the story in its telling, it affords me movement in a non-drifting kind of way where my horizontal and vertical axes are in balance. I'm not so heavenly minded that I become of no earthly good, because if I'm truly heavenly minded, earth will be impacted in every possible way. Godliness is not only for the year after, but it's also for the year and the now. And too little do we talk about the here and the now. We often just avert people's attention to the life hereafter. But what do I do in the meantime? So Paul becomes an example in chapter 3 of one who is Christ-minded. But before he does that, use his own example, his life as an example. He uses Timothy as one example. And then from verse 25 to verse 30, he's going to use Epaphroditus as the second example because he is bent on explaining that mindfulness is embodied. The mind of Christ is embodied. It is to be lived out through our total being and to touch every area of our lives, our marriage, our parenting, our job situations, even when I'm sitting in my vehicle and a taxi crashes in front of me and jumps the queue. That's what mindfulness is all about. And we spend very little time thinking about these kinds of practices, what I call sets of practices, or what some call ecologies of practice. What does this mindfulness look like when the crisis crashes in on me? When I reach my 60s and I retire and I reach for the bench and I find I got nothing to do. Well, how about God allowing you, giving you a second wind? Jews understood that very well. Because at age 80, they described from 80 onwards, that's when old age sets in. And that phase of their life was called Gevura. Lovely word, isn't it? Gevura. Gevura has to do with getting a second wind. Een paar van ons sit met ons wind al lang al uitgeslaan al, né? But God can give us a second wind. We can rise to meet the challenge as we grow older, to make impact. Timothy had use on his side, because Timothy would eventually end up in a pastoral situation in Ephesus. And the beauty of that is that throughout our useful days, our energies are high. And hopefully, as we get older, our wisdom index is a lot higher. When the energies start to wane, our wisdom starts to flow or ought to flow. Well, that only comes about when I learn how to walk with this orientation to life, that I'm a follower of the way. I'm not living according to 10 rules and 4 prescriptions and 5 techniques and 6 mantras and 2 meditations. I am mindful. The mind of Christ is permeating my mind. My orientation affords me movement in a non-drifting way where my life is being aligned. My vertical axis, my contact with God, and my horizontal axis, my contact with people, is in balance. Timothy was a portrait of that. And we're going to see in our next episode that Epaphroditus becomes a portrait of that. There are many blocks here that I still want to do. Probably need to spend a full episode on what orientation is all about and how my life can be oriented toward godliness, where I cultivate a disposition of my soul towards godly living as I am reintegrated into what God is doing and not become a rebel, one who's hostile to how God is operating in the context of the flow of reality. And so, as you head into this weekend, some of you are on long holiday because of Ascension Day yesterday. So you have a real long weekend. But as you go into this weekend, to be mindful of How are you portraying balance in your relationships? Can you flex? Can you go into flux? Can you move with the flow of what relationality throws at you? Because, yep, you're going to have those difficult folk in your life. None of us are exempt from tough relationships because they are such a crucial part of our transformation and tools in the toolkit of transforming. I trust that as you go into the rest of this day that you will go with God and be mindful of Him and who He is. Have a blessed day. Goodbye for now.